In this lesson, we will learn how to bake cycled animations in 3ds Max. What we have in this scene is the end result of our run cycle tutorial. So you can see that the animation loops infinitely. This range is actually only from 1 to 14. We can grab one of the controls and take a look. It's about 1 to 15, about 14 frames though. So you can see how beneficial the cycling system in Max is. We could use this character as a background prop that kind of runs across our scene, and it will save a lot of time by doing so. Can you imagine if we had to animate this across 300 frames? That'd be a lot of work for a repetitive action like this. Now sometimes if we need to go in and of course add variety to our animations, if the character is going through an obstacle course, well, that's a different story. That actually sounds kind of fun. But in this case, with something as repetitive as this, it would make sense to go ahead and apply our cycle. But what if we wanted to go ahead and stop that cycle at a certain moment and change course in the animation, maybe have the character do something slightly different? Well, Max allows us to do that, and we'll learn a technique for how to do so in this lesson. So the first thing we'll want to do is go in and grab all of our controls. All right, so with all of them selected, we can now right-click and head over to our curve editor. Now you can see I have just a few keys selected, but we don't need any keys selected for this to work, so feel free to go ahead and just deselect, just click anywhere in empty space in your workspace. All right, so we have all of our tracks highlighted. Another reason why it's important to check your show settings underneath Auto Expand, just make sure we have animated checked, and underneath Auto Select, that should also be the choice. We can now head over to Edit and choose Track View Utilities, and we want to grab this second choice here, Create Out of Range Keys. Let's go ahead and choose OK. You'll see that a little dialog pops up, and it asks us just a little bit of information. First, how many frames would we like before time? That's before our first key. So that first key is on frame 1. So since we don't want any animation before that time, let's go ahead and set that to 0, because we're basically going to have the animation loop for just one more cycle. So for 14 more frames. All right, so how about after time? Well, since we know that we would like just one more loop, and since we know that our range is about 14 frames, let's go ahead and put in a value of 14 in the after field. Now samples, this is how many keys that should be generated in this range. So if you're working with a larger range, you'll want to use a higher sample value. In this case, 10 will work out just fine. When we go ahead and choose Apply, you can see that Max has now generated 10 keyframes per function curve that we have just plotted out. All right, great. So if we were to go ahead and close out of our Create Out of Range Keys dialog, and go ahead and minimize the curve editor, you can see that the cycle still exists. Still going to continue after the range we've plotted out. So now we need to tell Max to go ahead and turn off the cycle. So if we were to head back over to our curve editor and choose Edit, Controller, Out of Range Types, take a look, we don't have access to it. Sometimes we have to refresh the curve editor to gain access. This is really simple to do. We can select one of our tracks. From there we can go back to Edit, Controller, and take a look. And now we have access to go to Out of Range Types. If we were to go ahead and select that and choose Constant, we'll be using that anyway for the other F-curves, so we might as well go ahead and apply this now. So we'll go ahead and choose OK. Now take a look. The Translate Y of that control has now been canceled out, or it has now stopped. But let's go ahead and grab all of our controls yet again so we can load in all of our tracks into the curve editor. So I'll go back to the selection set to grab everything. And now when we go back to Edit Controller, you can see we have access to Out of Range Types yet again. We can go ahead and choose Constant, choose OK, and now you'll see that the animation will no longer cycle. So if we were to go ahead and close out of our curve editor and try to play this back, all right, it's not going to happen. However, if we were to go ahead and scrub through the first few frames here, you can see that we have successfully plotted our animation. So I'll go ahead and grab one of the controls, take a look at our end frame, which is going to be about frame 29 or so. So we can go ahead and head over there. Remember, we hold down Control Alt and drag with our right mouse button so we can adjust our range. Now when we go ahead and play this back, take a look. there we have it. So we've managed to not only bake our cycle, but we've also learned how to go ahead and cut off the cycling system so that we can have our character stop at a certain moment. You can see keyframes have been plotted out, so we could always go in and change up the animation at this point. All right, so that's a look at how to plot cycled animations in Max.